videos, hidden inside classified archives for years, released last month from official U.S. military sensor systems, not leaked, not filmed by civilians, not smuggled out. The Pentagon reviewed them, cataloged them, and then deliberately published them. None of them have a confirmed explanation. Governments do not release footage they have explained. They do not release footage they have debunked. What gets published are the cases where the analysts ran out of answers. The Pentagon ran out of answers. In public. Here is what they released, and what they are still not saying. The 6 videos they couldn't explain. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, is the Pentagon division created specifically to investigate unidentified aerial phenomena. It has access to military sensor networks, classified radar data, and intelligence reporting channels that civilian researchers cannot reach. In early 2026, AARO publicly released 6 previously classified videos captured by U.S. military systems between 2021 and 2024. The footage came directly from U.S. European Command reporting channels. Every clip had been formally reviewed before release. None of them received a confirmed conventional explanation. The standout clip is designated PR-018. Recorded in 2024, it runs more than 10 minutes. A military infrared sensor tracks a heat-producing object moving through the sky. AARO's official assessment described the object as appearing to be physical, behaving in ways AARO analysts found unusual and ultimately unidentifiable. 10 minutes of military-grade infrared tracking. No identification at the end of it. PR-017 was different. Captured on a commercial cell phone camera in Europe, also in 2024, shorter and less resolved, still unresolved. 3 additional clips, PR-012, PR-013, and PR-014, were recorded in 2022 on military infrared equipment. In one case, AARO stated with confidence that the footage showed a real physical object, while simultaneously lacking sufficient data to say what it was. Skeptics within the defense analysis community pointed to the limitations of infrared imaging. Objects that appear structured and controlled in thermal footage can be atmospheric temperature inversions, distant aircraft at unusual angles, or birds generating body heat against a cold background. Without corroborating radar data published alongside the footage, they argued, the visual record alone is insufficient. AARO published the footage without corroborating radar data. The defense community's skeptical explanation and AARO's own release are in tension with each other. If these videos were explainable as atmospheric effects or distant aircraft, AARO would have said so. AARO reviewed them and said it could not identify what they showed. The footage was then released to the public with that conclusion attached. AARO also published a note alongside the release stating that it had reviewed over 1,000 UAP reports since its creation in 2022. Of those, a small percentage remained unexplained after full analysis. AARO did not define what percentage constitutes a small number of cases that defy explanation after being reviewed by a dedicated government office with access to classified sensor data. 6 videos from official military systems. No answers. And they were not the most disturbing thing released in that period. They shot one down. On February 12, 2023, a U.S. Air Force National Guard F-16 fired an AIM-9X Sidewinder missile at an object flying over Lake Huron at approximately 20,000 feet. The missile hit. The object was destroyed. Debris fell into the lake. The Pentagon has not confirmed what the object was. Officials described it as octagonal in shape with strings hanging off it. They said it posed a potential surveillance risk to sensitive military sites in the region. The recovery operation launched to retrieve debris from Lake Huron found nothing substantial enough to conclusively identify the object. The U.S. military fired a $400,000 missile at something over American airspace. The object was destroyed. and the official position remains that they do not know what it was. Skeptics and defense analysts suggested the object was most likely a small commercial or hobbyist balloon, possibly launched from Canada or the continental U.S., that had drifted into restricted airspace. The octagonal shape and hanging strings are consistent with some research balloon designs. NORAD had been tracking several unidentified objects in that period following a period of heightened radar sensitivity after the Chinese surveillance balloon shootdown 1 week earlier. The NORAD radar sensitivity detail is significant. In the days after the Chinese balloon was shot down over South Carolina, NORAD adjusted its radar filtering thresholds to capture slower-moving objects it had previously excluded as atmospheric clutter. What that change revealed was a category of objects that had been flying in North American airspace undetected because the radar was not configured to see them. The Lake Huron object was one of 3 additional objects shot down in the same week. None of the 3 have been conclusively identified. The recovery operations for all 3 returned insufficient physical evidence. Senator Chuck Schumer called for answers in a statement that week. The White House press secretary was asked whether the objects were extraterrestrial and said the administration had no indication of that. The Pentagon said the same. Neither provided an identification to replace the extraterrestrial one they were declining. The military shot down objects it could not identify in its own airspace, and then could not recover enough of them to determine what they were. That is the official record. Formation over the Persian Gulf. Among the 40-plus videos released in the Pentagon's second batch was footage captured over the Persian Gulf in 2019. The clip shows multiple unidentified objects flying in formation above a body of water with significant U.S. naval traffic below. The objects moved together, not in the loose clustering of birds or weather balloons caught in the same wind current. They moved with a kind of coordination that requires either a shared flight control system or a behavior pattern. No known drone swarm technology in 2019 was capable of replicating. U.S. Central Command was operating in the Persian Gulf in 2019. The airspace had active military surveillance. Whatever was in the footage had been tracked by military sensors at the time of recording, reviewed by intelligence analysts, and then classified for years before being released without explanation. The standard counter-explanation for formation sightings is drone swarms, which have become increasingly common for both military and commercial purposes. Iranian drone activity in the Gulf in that period was a documented concern. A commercial drone operator, a military test, or a coordinated spoofing operation could all theoretically produce what the footage shows. What the footage also shows is that the objects were moving in a way that AARO analysts, reviewing the footage with full sensor context, could not attribute to any of those explanations. If the formation had been Iranian drones or a known military test, the footage would not have been included in an unresolved UAP archive. The Gulf footage was unresolved in 2019. It was unresolved when it was classified. It was unresolved when it was released. The 2021 Syria footage in the same batch showed an object that accelerated and disappeared from tracking systems instantly, a behavior that AARO's own analysts described as inconsistent with any known aircraft or drone. Something was moving in coordinated formation above one of the most heavily monitored stretches of ocean on Earth, and nobody claimed it. The Gulf and Syria footage were among 16 cases in the second batch that AARO classified as unresolved after full review. The remaining cases in that batch were attributed to known objects, sensor artifacts, or insufficient data. 16 cases with full military sensor context remained unexplained. Those 16 are in the public archive now. The clip that was classified for 12 years. In 2013, a military infrared sensor captured footage of a glowing, roughly star-shaped object moving through the sky. The clip was classified. It remained classified for 12 years before being included in the Pentagon's 162-file release in 2026. When it was released, the footage went viral within hours, not because of what the object looked like, but because of how it moved. infrared recordings can produce distortions that make ordinary objects appear exotic. The star shape, the brightness, the apparent rapid directional changes, all of these could be products of thermal imaging artifacts rather than the object's actual behavior. Online analysts identified a specific counter-explanation almost immediately. Military parachute flares, used in training exercises to illuminate large areas, burn brightly and descend slowly under a small parachute. In infrared, the heat pattern and camera processing can distort a flare into a star-like shape. Several viewers pointed to a faint shape visible at the left edge of the frame that appeared consistent with a parachute canopy. Others noted a smoke trail. The parachute flare explanation is technically coherent and was widely accepted in parts of the online analysis community. It is also the explanation that raises the most uncomfortable secondary question. If the 2013 footage showed a military training flare, why was it classified for 12 years? Military training exercise footage is not classified. Flares are not classified. The routine deployment of infrared visible flares during exercises generates thousands of hours of footage annually. None of it is kept in a classified UAP archive. The inclusion of this clip in the Pentagon's unresolved UAP release suggests that at least some of the analysts who reviewed it in 2013 did not find the flare explanation sufficient. What they did find sufficient to justify 12 years of classification has never been stated. The footage is officially unresolved. The flare explanation does not explain why it was hidden. And what separates the next case from everything else in this archive is not the sensor system or the military context. It was filmed in visible light, in full daylight, and the object it captured did something no flare, no drone, and no balloon has ever done on camera. The object that faded. The footage from 2020 is different from every other clip in this script. It was not captured by an infrared military sensor. It was filmed in visible light, in full daylight, against a pale, hazy sky. Two views of the same object, and what the camera recorded was not a glowing heat signature or a blur of light. The object in the footage had structure, a dark, angular, segmented shape, multiple connected components. Curved and angular pieces fitted together into a form that did not resemble any aircraft, drone, balloon, or atmospheric phenomenon on record. No visible wings, no rotors, no exhaust system, no propulsion apparatus of any kind visible on its surface. It was not smooth the way a balloon is smooth. It was complex the way a machine is complex. It hovered, stationary, above the open air, without any of the drift or oscillation that tethered or free-floating objects produce. Witnesses described complete silence. No engine sound, no rotor noise, nothing. Then it began to disappear. Not by flying away, not by ascending out of frame. It faded. The object's definition decreased gradually, its edges becoming less distinct, its surface less visible, until it dissolved into the background sky entirely. No departure vector, no observable exit path. It was there, and then it was not. Skeptics argued that the disappearance was consistent with a mylar balloon, or reflective surface object catching and then losing direct sunlight, causing it to become visible and then invisible, depending on its orientation relative to the sun. The structural complexity of the object, they suggested, could be a cluster of debris or tangled materials rather than a single constructed craft. The counter-argument focuses on the hover. A balloon cluster or debris field drifts. It responds to air movement. The 2020 object held a fixed position in the open sky in a way that passive objects do not. The combination of structural complexity, sustained stable hover, and gradual visual dissolution has not been matched by any conventional explanation applied to the footage. The footage has circulated in UAP research communities since 2020. Nobody has identified what produced the object in the frame. The behavior it exhibited, particularly the gradual fade rather than a physical departure, does not match the behavioral signature of any object in the official UAP database. Every other case in this script ends with unknown objects in military sensors above conflict zones. This one was filmed in daylight, above open sky, and the object left by becoming invisible in front of the camera. What the astronauts saw. When the Pentagon released its 162-file archive, the entries that caused the most sustained public reaction were not the recent military sensor recordings. They were the Apollo transcripts. Declassified mission files connected to Apollo 17, the final crewed lunar landing in 1972, included photographs taken during the mission that show 3 bright objects suspended against the darkness of space in a symmetrical triangular formation. The objects appear evenly spaced. Astronaut Ronald Evans, the command module pilot who remained in lunar orbit during the surface mission, described observing bright particles or fragments passing the spacecraft, noting they were jagged and angular and behaved unlike ice particles or mechanical debris. The Apollo 12 files include imagery showing a vertical hazy blue formation stretching across the lunar horizon. The object appears to move through the frame in a way that contrasts with the static lunar environment. For decades, the image was categorized as a lens artifact. The newly released files indicate it had been flagged internally as anomalous at the time. During Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin observed a sizable object traveling near the spacecraft during transit to the moon. The object was large enough that Aldrin inspected it through a monocular viewing device. He also described strange flashes inside the cabin and an external light source that could not be fully identified. These observations were recorded in official mission debriefings and then kept from public discussion for decades. NASA's official position has consistently been that astronauts observed debris, ice particles, and optical artifacts during the Apollo missions. Former NASA flight director Christopher Kraft, in interviews before his death in 2019, acknowledged that some anomalous observations were recorded, but attributed them to the psychological effects of the space environment and the difficulty of depth perception in a vacuum where there are no reference points for scale or distance. The problem with the depth perception explanation is Aldrin's monocular inspection. A trained test pilot does not use optical equipment to examine debris or ice particles. The act of bringing a monocular to the window to observe an object suggests the object had sufficient size and definition to warrant closer inspection. Ice particles do not warrant monocular inspection. The Apollo files were kept from public discussion during the Cold War, when the moon landings were symbols of national technological supremacy. The suggestion that unknown objects were operating near American spacecraft would have complicated that narrative significantly. The files were classified. The astronauts debriefed. The public got the moon landing without the footnotes. What the newly released transcripts show is not that aliens visited the moon. What they show is that the agency responsible for the most scrutinized and documented human achievement in history decided at the highest level that the public should not know what its astronauts actually observed. That decision was made, and it held for 50 years. Whatever the Apollo astronauts saw in lunar orbit, it was significant enough to classify. It was not significant enough to investigate publicly, and it was sitting in a government archive the entire time the official story was being told. 162 files and no answers. On May 8, 2026, the Pentagon released the full Pursue archive at war.gov/UFO. 162 declassified files. Military pilot reports, radar records, NASA transcripts, intelligence documents, and infrared recordings spanning from the late 1940s to recent years. Material drawn from the Department of Defense, the FBI, NASA, and the State Department. The release was the largest single government UFO disclosure in history. Officials were careful in their framing. None of the files confirm alien life. None of the footage constitutes definitive evidence of extraterrestrial technology. Many of the sightings remain unexplained because the data is incomplete, the sensors were limited, or the environmental context was not fully recorded. That framing is accurate and also incomplete. The files span 80 years. The sightings they document come from trained military pilots, intelligence officers, and NASA astronauts. The objects described in those files move in ways that analysts in every decade, with every generation of sensor technology, have been unable to attribute to any known aircraft, atmospheric effect, or human technology. The Pentagon's own caveat that incomplete data prevents identification does not explain why objects with no conventional explanation have been appearing in restricted military airspace consistently for 8 decades. Incomplete data is a statement about the investigation. It is not a statement about what was being investigated. What the Pursue archive confirms is the pattern, not the objects. The pattern. Official encounters, officially documented, officially classified, officially unresolved. Across 8 decades. Across multiple branches of the U.S. military. Across different countries, different sensor systems, and different generations of analysts who each ran out of explanations independently. The files are open now. Every case in this script is in them. And not one of them ends with an answer. 6 classified videos with no explanation. An F-16 that shot something down and never identified it. Formation objects over the Persian Gulf. A 12-year classified infrared clip. A daylight object that faded into open sky. Apollo transcripts that were never meant to be public. And 162 files that confirm this has been happening for 80 years. How much do you think is still being withheld? And now that the archive is public at war.gov/UFO, do you believe we have the full picture? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.